Good morning, business class. I just wanted to I'm going to start pumping out some videos here. The first is just a summary of yesterday's Q&A, 323 types of business organizations. They basically break down to sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporation. Almost always you'll see that, although in recent years you'll start to see possibly even limited liabilities and which are called LLCs. There's others as well. It can get a little complicated, so we're going to stick with the textbook, kind of a textbook layout for high school business, and that is the first one is sole proprietorship. And you can see it consists of one. Now this site is studyfinance.com. I just want to review, and I just want to make some comments on this as we go along. The sole proprietorship, one individual doing business. That's the single business owner, and a lot of the advantages and disadvantages just kind of come from common sense. What are some positives about working on your own or being the only boss? And here you can see ease of formation. It's easy to start, easy to dissolve, doesn't take up too much. There might be some technical things you might need to do depending on the type of business. You may need to register with the state, depending on the nature of your business, or register your business name with the county. There may be a few things like that, the usual business startup, and then you have to have your business plan and so on to be successful. But easy to start, easy to dissolve. Now it says low startup costs. Well, that's going to depend upon what kind of business you're going to get into. So that's not necessarily totally true. But here's the other thing about the sole proprietor. Again, you're on your own. So what's one of the real positives is the ownership of profits. You keep you make the money. You keep it to yourself. Okay. Now it says sole proprietorships typically subject to fewer regulations. It depends what you're talking about. If you're a plumber or an electrician, there are certain regulations, certifications, requirements, licenses. So not always simple, and it depends on the nature of your business. So again, just thinking in terms of ease, if you're by yourself, yes, it makes it easier to start, but it depends also on the type of business you're going to get into. This last part about no corporate income tax, we're going to talk about that in a second. The income is reported on your own individual tax return. There's no corporate income tax, and I'm going to explain that when we get to corporate taxes. Disadvantages, unlimited liability, and this is a big one. There are ways around it. The laws have changed a little, but you're personally responsible for any liability in your business. And that means that they could possibly go after personal assets. So if you did something negligent, something that could be proven that you owe somebody, they could not just dissolve your business assets. It's possible that they could get to your personal assets. So you would need to talk to an accountant, an attorney, in setting up even your sole proprietorship in terms of trying to limit your liability in some way, shape, or form. Now, obviously, there's insurance liability that all businesses can take out, and that would help. But again, the idea that if you're in a sole proprietorship, they can come after personal assets. The second item there, limited life. Limited life. Most cases, business owner dies, the business dies as well. There may be ways to get around that. Have it in a contract that the business would go to somebody in particular, employee, a family member. But again, technically the business ceases to exist. And that third one, well, this is Shark Tank, right? May be difficult for an individual to raise capital. You're starting your own business. It's a sole proprietorship. It's just you. There's no one else to lean on. So providing your own money for the business is going to obviously have some limitations. Okay, and then here's a little summary. And here's the point. It says ways to kind of limit your liability, and you can read that paragraph there. There are technicalities that technical organizations you can set or organize your business in such a way that, and they use the word there, hybrid forms of business that kind of include some of the protections that you get in some of the other kinds of businesses. Now, again, here we go to number 2, a partnership, 2 or more individuals. Now, there's a pretty cool word, synergy. 2 heads are better than 1, I guess, is the best explanation there. It's nice to have a partnership where you have someone else sharing the responsibility, as well as bringing some expertise. You want to open a restaurant. You may have worked in a restaurant. You may know how to run a restaurant. You know all the ins and outs. But maybe you're not as good a chef or understand how to operate a kitchen as well as someone else. So you partner up with somebody that has that expertise. So bringing in different kinds of expertise to the business is an advantage of a partnership. Now, you can probably try to do that with a sole proprietorship and just hire yourself a chef, but when you're in a partnership, there's obviously the sense of ownership. So there's more commitment. Partnership's pretty easy to form as well, but again, here, you want to really make sure, be careful when you're entering into a partnership, that you are very careful with your contract and your wording. And again, here we go, trying to possibly get an attorney involved in creating some kind of legal document that clearly outlines responsibilities in all aspects, in terms of effort. How's it always going to be 50-50? And I think human nature is such that people always think that they're doing more than the other person. So it gets a little tricky in partnerships. Okay, it gets a little tricky because now you are sharing ideas and you're bringing in separate skills, and all that's nice, but there is the human aspect to that, which throws things into the works. It makes things a little bit more complicated. And there it is again down the bottom, no corporate income taxes. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, what that means. Here, we've already talked a little bit about the disadvantages of a partnership. Again, kind of common sense, right? What are some of the negatives? That third one down there, real possibility of disputes or conflicts. That's, if you read about it, if you follow along, I mean, partnerships can be tricky due to normal human disagreement. And to stay on the same page is not always easy. Sometimes even with someone you think is a best friend, a spouse, a family member, a brother, a sister, we're going to get along fine. Well, may not always work like that. By the way, I got a little cold. That's the only reason I'm coughing. I feel pretty good, just so if anyone was concerned. Now, again, here's a big disadvantage: unlimited liability. General partners are individually responsible for the business. Again, you can create limited partnerships, and this is a new thing in the law that you would look into if you're going to get into a partnership and forming a particular type of partnership. And again, that's a whole another legal aspect that I don't want to get into at this time. But again, know that you're responsible for your partners. You're in the same business together. And so that does present a little trickiness because what if you disagree? What if they do something wrong? But here you see down the bottom, limited liability partnerships, LLPs, LLCs. Uh, these are ways that you can try to limit your liability. Always a concern when you're starting a business. Uh, your liability, what you possibly could owe. And now the corporation, probably the most dominant form of business organization in the United States, not in terms of numbers, there are more sole proprietorships than there are corporations, but in terms of business done, business accomplished, business activity, the corporation far and away uh, uh, produces more business activity in the United States. And why is that? Why is that? So let's take a look at some of the advantages. Unlimited commercial life. The corporation kind of exists on its own. It's its own separate entity. There are owners of the corporation. They are called stockholders, right? We talked about that a little bit. Stockholders in a corporation. But the corporation exists. If a stockholder were to sell and get out, the corporation continues to operate. It has its own CEO, chief executive officer. It has its own management team, and it continues to exist whether an individual buys into the corporation or sells the corporation. The corporation exists as on its own. And you can see in item 2 there, greater flexibility in raising capital through the sale of stock. Selling stock in a corporation, publicly traded in particular, right? You don't even know who the owners are of the corporation. There could be thousands, tens of thousands, millions of owners in a particular corporation. Some not so many. Some may have a greater percentage of ownership, but it's easier to raise money because all you have to do is sell stock in the company. Okay, and it's item 3 there, ease of transferring, kind of just mentioned it. Now here's the limited liability portion. Okay, probably one of the biggest advantages of the corporation because you're limited to your investment. If a corporation, if you see the line there, sued for billions, individual shareholders' liability is limited to their own value in stock. So we've seen corporations dissolve, create problems, mishaps, missteps, be sued. The corporation could be dissolved. Well, as a stockholder, you could lose your money, but they won't come after your personal assets. So your liability is limited. That's where the limited liability idea comes in. Makes a big difference when you have a company and you know that at least your personal life, your personal assets are protected. Disadvantages, regulatory restrictions. I don't know. Yeah, there are certain restrictions and certain filings that a corporation has to do with state and federal levels that maybe a sole proprietorship does not. But regulations really vary as much by the type of industry you're in. If you're in the industry of environmental protection, digging up oil tanks out of the ground, you are, even if you're a sole proprietorship or a partnership, there are many, many regulations that have to be adhered to, certifications that need to be acquired. So not that easy as far as regulations are concerned, and that could be sole proprietorship as well. Higher organizational operational costs, you can read that there, more clerical, more paperwork. Yeah, there is a little bit more. But here's the one that most folks would say is maybe the biggest disadvantage, in particular to a corporation, double taxation. What do they mean by that? Well, a corporation pays a corporate tax on their profits. Any money that the corporation makes, there's a corporate income tax return. Just like you and I file a tax return, the corporation has to file its own tax return. And that has to be taken care of separately. Now, what do they mean by double taxation? We had talked about corporations declaring dividends. That's where stockholders get a small percentage of the profit. So if I'm a stockholder in a corporation and the corporation makes money and the corporation files their income, the corporate tax return, and the corporate tax return has to pay tax on their profits, there goes taxes to the state or federal government. Now, when I receive the dividend check, when I receive the dividend check as a dividend as an owner of the corporation, as a stockholder, I have to declare that on my own individual tax return. And that's what they're talking about with double taxation. The profit is taxed as a corporate tax, and then when the profits are distributed to stockholders, individual owners of the corporation, they have to declare that as income on their own personal income tax return. And so, therefore, there's your double taxation. Essentially, the profits of the corporation are being taxed twice. And major disadvantage of a corporation, but obviously not big enough because there are many, many corporations out there. And this is a huge segment of business activity, corporate business activity. So not enough to hamper and make folks think twice with regard to incorporating. So those are the three major business organizations that we're going to stay with: sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation. And why would you choose one over the other? It would depend. It would depend on the kind of business that you are getting into. It may depend on the assets that are required, the money that's required to start the business, and really a lot of other expansion ideas. It really is going to be contingent upon your business plan and where you see the business going in the future. You may start out as a sole proprietorship or a partnership and then decide to incorporate later. That can easily be done. It can be done either way. You can move back or forth. So it's not like you've committed and you have to dissolve or sell a business if you decide to take a sole proprietorship and incorporate it, or a partnership and incorporate it, or a corporation even, and take it private because it's not big enough. It's something that you think can run as a sole proprietorship. Okay? So that's our video for today. I have a little assignment today, the Q&A 324, a little summary, and I'm going to put a grade on it out of 10, sort of like the beginning of quiz season. We have to get some, we have to try to continue to assess as we move along. So far, thanks. If you can submit the assignments via Google Classroom, makes a big difference for me doing that. If you can, it's just easier for me to organize. Some folks are emailing their assignments to me directly, but to submit them via Google Classroom is just a lot easier for me to keep things organized and view them. But today's assignment, you're going to turn in, and I'm going to assign a grade out of 10, and I'm going to look for accuracy. Up until now, it was just on those Q&As, as you know. Did you do them? Did you complete them? Did you make an earnest effort to get a 5? Here, I'm going to just take a little more time scrutinizing your response on today's Q&A 324. Okay? So please ask any questions, email, or on the classroom stream, and I'm looking for them. But thanks again so far for the cooperation in this very new endeavor, certainly for me, and I guess even for a lot of folks, a lot of the students as well. Okay, have a good day.